Anyway, if you were to ask most people to explain why the classic Christmas song "It's a Wonderful Time of the Year" by Andy Williams includes the line, "There'll be scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago," well, most people may mumble something about Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, or more likely just shrug and say, they don't know. In fact, it was once a common tradition to chill the blood of fellow revelers during the festive season with tales of ghosts and ominous creatures. And how did such a tradition begin? Well, long ago, in a galaxy far, far away, before television or even radio programs were available to entertain during the long December nights, people spent time telling each other stories while huddled around a burning Yule log. Sadly, however, the tradition has largely died out in many parts of the world, but not here at the Storylink Radio. Or the Shawnee Library, for that great matter. You know, the only real biggest regret I have about coming up 2024 is there's one extra day between us and Halloween. Well. So, chapter 1. Was she doing the right thing, or was she being selfish, as her mother had accused? Breaking with tradition wasn't easy for a Taurus, and B was a typical Taurian, sensible, reliable, practical, and a stickler for routine. So why had she booked into a hotel in Scotland in the middle of nowhere for a festive getaway break over Christmas instead of celebrating the holidays with her family? Well, it wasn't a decision she had rushed into, no. But, well, things were changing in the family, so this seemed like the right time to break away from the norm. Her mother just loved to entertain the clan on Christmas Day, but the clan was expanding rapidly. There was her mother's boyfriend, and B's stepfather-to-be, for instance. He was 10 years younger than her mum, and they'd been together almost a year now, but B still couldn't look on him as a father figure. She would never begrudge her mother happiness, but she couldn't help cringing whenever she saw them kissing, cuddling, holding hands. Well, enough said. Then there was her sister's new man and their sickly little baby. Well, quite healthy apparently, but always sickly, and her brother's expanding family. They'd now had 4 kids in as many years. Somehow Aunt Constance had started to join in the family tradition, spending Christmas at her sister's. She would spend Christmas morning complaining, nitpicking, carping, and whining until after a few drops of Christmas cheer, the afternoon would always find her flirting outrageously with every man in the house. So anyway, this year, after dropping off all their presents and staying long enough at her mother's to have lunch together, B. Carson was stepping onto the train to spend Christmas in the wilds of Scotland. Yes, not K with the clan with the C. There'd been something about the brochure inviting people to experience 4 days of old-fashioned Christmas that had really spoken to B. The smell of pine trees, crackling log fires, mulled wine, decorated Christmas trees in every room, tangerines and walnuts, party games, and frosted forest walks. Wow, how could anyone who loved the idea of experiencing Christmas as they imagined it should be resist that? B settled into her seat for the long train journey, something she always looked forward to, really. She had loved traveling in trains as a young girl, and it was a joy she'd never grown out of. She had few opportunities to spend quality time with her Kindle and iPod without interruptions, and, well, frankly, this was what she enjoyed the most during the first few hours of the journey. But then as the railways took them over the border into Scotland, through parts where roads did not go, Bee found herself happy to sit back and watch the beautiful countryside whir past. Almost as if on cue, as they neared their destination, huge snowflakes began falling from the skies, turning the landscape into a soft white blanket of crystal white snow. It had been a long journey, but a reasonably relaxing one. The most difficult part was when she had to change trains twice before reaching the magical village of Abadoon, which in English means Abadoon. She hardly noticed the freezing weather as she stood on the platform watching the train rumble out of the station. It was the peace and tranquility of this secluded setting that Bee appreciated the most. She drank in the almost silence as snowflakes gently fell around her, the only sound being the wind in the branches of the trees behind the station. The view all around her was stunning, with just a glimpse of the snow-covered roofs of cottages beyond the station. The taxi was waiting for her just as the hotel receptionist had promised. when Bee had made the booking. Once settled into the back of the taxi, she was asked friendly questions about her journey so far and told how the driver had already picked up 2 other passengers that day to be dropped off at the same hotel. The first had been a young man who had business in the area, and just a few hours ago he had picked up a middle-aged woman who looked like she'd been heading for Glastonbury but ended up in the middle of nowhere instead. By the end of the journey, Bee wondered what he'd be telling his next passengers about his impressions of her. The old rectory looked charming and welcoming, lights from its windows throwing golden gleams over the snow-covered pathways and garden. As Bee entered the cozy building, a black Labrador came bounding towards her, tail wagging frantically as a voice called, "Archie, leave the guest alone." The brochure had promised guests would be welcomed with warmth and courtesy, and both the woman who showed Bee up to her room and the Labrador couldn't have made Bee feel more welcome. She had missed afternoon tea, but all guests were invited to an informal gathering with the canapes in the lounge from 7 p.m. Bee's room, like the hotel, had an old-world charm, yet with modern conveniences of color TV, hair dryer, telephone, and en suite with a huge bathtub. The whole place was spotlessly clean, and Bee could already feel herself unwinding and looking forward to her Christmas break. A maid dressed in a crisp blue uniform knocked on the door with a complimentary pot of tea before Bee showered and changed, ready to go back downstairs and meet fellow guests. As she took the chance to wander through the large corridors and with the old windows and staircase decorated for Christmas to take a peek into some of the public rooms, Bee felt as if she had been transported into another age. There was a quaint sitting room which seemed to invite guests to come in and read while curled up in a chair beside a roaring fire, but it was a lounge that was currently filled with people and the sound of cheerful conversation. Feeling just a little bit shy, Bee stepped into the room adorned with the festive ornaments and decorations and was immediately welcomed by the same maid who had knocked on the door earlier with a pot of tea. She was now being offered a glass of wine. People were laughing and talking. There was a warm house party feel to the place, and Bee could have easily imagined she'd walked into a setting for an Agatha Christie novel. One group was obviously a family with grandparents, mother, father, and 2 young children. Young couples stood by the window admiring how the movement of the snowflakes was being captured by the lights in the garden as they fluttered down to the ground. By the Christmas tree stood a young man looking a little uncomfortable as a woman with a vibrant scarf tied around her long dark hair laughed out loud to something she was telling him. Her large hoop earrings and long skirt suggested that she was one of the guests her taxi driver described earlier. Bee stood in the sidelines, sipping her wine and drinking in the atmosphere until they were all shown to the dining room, and she found herself sharing a table with the gypsy and the gentleman. During the 4-course meal, Bee discovered the young man who was called Paul and had traveled into Scotland for a job interview 2 days before. He'd got the job, and his traveling expenses had been covered by his new company, so bully for him. And so he therefore decided to stay in the area over Christmas. The gypsy, who apparently went by the name of Selina, had been brought in to conduct a Christmas ghost hunt. Bee almost choked on the fish she had just popped into her mouth and was sure her eyes must have popped out of her head when she heard this declaration. A ghost hunt? You are joking, aren't you? There are no such thing as ghosts, and surely Halloween's a more appropriate time for such spooky antics, no? The woman looked quite offended. Researching into the paranormal should not be compared with old-fashioned seance parlor antics used to prove the spirit world, she informed Bee haughtily. Modern-day ghost hunters use a scientific approach to prove ghosts do indeed exist, ma'am. Spooktacular, exclaimed Paul, with obvious delight at the prospect. So what, you'll be using scientific methods to introduce us to the ghosts of Christmas past? Or maybe the ghosts of Christmas future? Laughed Bee, unable to take the one very seriously. I certainly never expected a ghost hunt would be included in our festive itinerary. Did you not read the brochure, ma'am? Selina seemed both surprised and annoyed. It's one of the main themes of this festive break, after all. A ghost hunt, Bee repeated incredulously. At Christmas. No, I suppose I didn't notice it in the brochure, as it's not something that would induce me to book a festive break. Yes, you did make a booking all the same, did you not? Selina responded accusingly. Yes, I did, inspired by the idea of a relaxing Christmas, nodded B. So, Selina, since neither of us have read that blurb, why not tell us what's behind the idea of a ghost hunt? Paul urged the medium to explain. He leaned forward and rested his elbows on the table. You have me intrigued. Selina rewarded Paul with a huge smile from her heavily painted lips, and completely ignoring B, told him, You see, the old rectory has always had a reputation of being haunted. I've been here a couple of times, quite a number of times actually, before now. And you actually made contact with, Paul seemed to be making an effort to look serious. With ghosts, then, he added in a stage whisper. Of course, the medium nodded. This place is riddled with them. In fact, ever since it was turned into a hotel, guests have woken in the night to find themselves being watched over by a ghostly figure. Staff have heard children running down the haunted corridor. This past year, there's been an increase in paranormal activity, and this is the third time so far that I have been called in to investigate. Surely a scientific investigation is very different to a festive ghost hunt? B's question was sincere, not intended to cause any annoyance. I have no need of scientific equipment to sense the spirit's haunting of this old building, the medium replied. B decided this was a contradiction to her earlier assertions, but it was a restful Christmas break she desired, not an argument with a half-baked gypsy in the middle of the wilds of Scotland, and so for this reason B decided to keep her thoughts to herself. During an after-dinner drink on the house, the owner of the hotel, Mrs. Cullen, with her black Labrador sitting faithfully by her feet, licking everybody that came by, the Labrador, not Mrs. Cullen, outlined their festive itinerary, placing heavy emphasis on the now much talked about ghost tour to be undertaken on Christmas Eve. Welcome, Crash. And then suddenly, as guests were asking questions to which Selina, the medium, was enthusiastically responding, the room was plunged into blackness. Walker! After sudden gasps of surprise, the room went momentarily silent until Paul laughed out loud. Ha ha! Seems like we don't have to wait until tomorrow to experience an eerie evening. The antics have already begun. This is not funny, one of the family from another table called out. It's scaring the children. Put the lights back on. There was a crash as a chair fell over and people started moving about. Could guests please remain seated until we find a torch? Mrs. Cullen shouted above the commotion. Just put the lights back on, shouted a voice from behind B. This has not been stage managed, replied the hotel owner. It would appear we have actually had a power cut. Someone came into the room with a torch, shedding an eerie light around the tables. It was a young maid who had also been acting as waitress during the meal. I have some torches here, she exclaimed as she started giving them out. Mr. McGregor, the hotel's janitor, is trying to start up the Jenny, but he says it hasn't been used in years. Mrs. Cullen apologized for the inconvenience and suggested guests return to their rooms. B took the torch as she was offered and was glad of Paul's company as they carefully made their way up the stairs and along the pitch-black corridors. I wonder which of these corridors is the haunted one, Paul whispered. Well, I'm not really sure I want to think about that at the moment, replied B. She was trying to keep her thoughts logical. There was no such thing as ghosts. And this was probably all part of the hotel's plan to get guests in the mood for tomorrow night's ghost hunt. I can't believe I've booked into a supposedly haunted hotel for Christmas break. Relax. Paul sounded immensely cheerful, and B could tell he was thoroughly enjoying this little escapade. It's all a bit of fun and certainly makes for a Christmas with a difference, huh? This is my room. B stopped at the door and fished inside her pocket for the key. So, you be okay on your own then? Paul's voice was more serious now, and B sensed his genuine concern. She felt herself smiling. Oh, yes, I'll be fine. After all, he responded merrily as she slipped into the room, you don't believe in ghosts. Exactly, Bee laughed. Sweet dreams, was his parting shot as he disappeared into the blackness. Someone had been in Bee's room while they were eating dinner to light a fire in the hearth. The logs were blazing warmly behind the fire guard, flames casting eerie shadows on the walls and furniture. Bee felt the sharp contrast between the coldness of the corridors and the warmth within her room, and was grateful for the thoughtfulness behind the gesture. Without electricity, there'd be no heating, but a brightly burning log fire offered some measure of compensation. After changing into her nightwear, thankful that she'd remembered to bring her large, fluffy dressing gown, Bee fumbled through her suitcase for her Kindle, and then settled in a chair beside the fire. The light wasn't good enough to read it by, because she had one of those old-fashioned Kindles without a backlight, and although she didn't want to admit it, she felt unsettled, probably because of all the ghostly talk earlier. Or maybe it was just those undercooked French fries from the train station. Shadows danced around the room, and once or twice she thought she saw a movement within those shadows and sensed a presence. Your imagination's playing tricks on you, Bee scolded herself aloud. Stop being such a fool. Why are you being a fool? Came a quiet, childlike voice from a corner of the room, and Bee felt sure she must have hit the ceiling as she jumped in shock. She tried to calm the suddenly loud beating of her heart so she could listen to the sounds around her, convinced she had imagined it. Who's there? A ghostly figure stepped out of the shadows. It was a young girl, about 17 years old, dressed in a long white gown. Was this another of the part of the hotel's ghostly agenda? Bee was starting to think she'd booked into the wrong place this Christmas. Look, I would rather not participate in anything to do with Selena's little psychic show, Bee admitted. This isn't why I chose to come here, and I'm finding this an invasion of my privacy. I don't know what you mean, the girl replied. She was now standing in the middle of the room, staring into the fire. Oh, it looks so warm. She seemed almost mesmerized by the flames. I wish I could feel it. Well, come closer then, Bee invited, starting to feel sorry for the girl in her thin gown. You must be freezing, dear. I suppose, was the strange reply. Can you really see me then? Well, I'm talking to you, aren't I? Bee laughed. Yes, it's dark, but there's enough light from the fire and this torch for me to see you. Well, you're the first, said the girl. You must be psychic. No, Bee laughed. I'm not that easily fooled. She took a closer look at the girl, who was as pale in coloring as the gown she was wearing. And you, dear, you're far too young to be going around dressed like that in the thick of winter. What was management thinking about in employing young girls for their ghostly tricks? Do you realize how dangerous it could be lurking in guests' rooms in the dead of night? Oh, well, this is my favorite room, the girl replied, and I linger here often. Something about her response made Bee sit up and take notice. All of a sudden, she felt the hairs in the back of her neck rise, and a cold chill went through her body. She was allowing her imagination to once again get the better of her, but in the darkness, lit only by flickering firelight, the girl really did look ghostly. Are you not afraid of ghosts? Asked the girl, as if reading Bee's mind. I don't believe in ghosts. Do you believe in me? What a strange question. I see you. I'm speaking to you, so of course I believe in you. But you don't believe in ghosts. Seeing is believing. So far I have yet to see. You see me. You are not a ghost. The girl smiled. Many would say otherwise. Bee was doing her best to ignore the increased fluttering of her heart. Why didn't she say out loud what she was starting to suspect? But it couldn't be. How could she be sitting in a hotel in the wilds of Scotland with snow steadily falling outside, a fire blazing in the hearth, talking to a ghost? What's your name? Bee asked, not wanting to show her increasing suspicion and the nervousness she was starting to feel lest she scare her surprise visitor away. Martha, came the reply. Martha May McAllister,
born 7th June, 1812. I used to work here when I was 12 years old for my Aunt Jane, or Mrs. Armstrong, as we had to call her then.
Suddenly the temperature in the room seemed to drop below freezing at the enormity of this moment struck Bee. If this was true, if it was really happening, her whole belief system was about to be transformed. Pragmatic Beatrice Casson would from now on be heard to admit there may be some truth in paranormal activity. If, of course, this girl was a ghost. But surely it couldn't possibly be. She leaned forward to throw another log on the fire, half expecting the girl to vanish when she turned around, but Martha May McAllister had taken yet another step closer and was now standing within reaching distance of her chair. McAllister 17 instead of McAllen 21. Interesting. Why are you here, Martha? Bee asked gently. Why me when there's a medium staying in a room further along the corridor? Martha shrugged her little shoulders. I don't know. I felt an instant connection with you when you came into the room. I don't know how it works. I can make no contact whatsoever with that medium. Are there others? Others like you? Martha shook her head. No, not here. All others must have passed on to other places. Well, why can't you pass on? I don't know. I have pleasant memories of the time I spent here when I was like you. Maybe that's what keeps drawing me to this place. Like me? When you were alive, you mean? I suppose. Well, why not? Why not share your memories? Bee suggested as she put the Kindle down on the table next to her. It's too dark for me to read, because I didn't splurge for a modern Kindle with a backlight. I just got this old cheap one that doesn't have a backlight on it because it was more reasonably priced and has really not very much memory. But anyway, I'm not going anywhere, Martha. So tell me your story. The girl smiled. You really want to know my story? Bee nodded. Yes, I do. I can't read my Kindle after all. So yes, I do. This was a fascinating experience. She was going to save every moment while it lasted. What is it, Martha, do you think that's keeping you tied to this building? Was it your relationship with your aunt? Martha shook her head in denial. No. We weren't close, but at least she felt obligated to take me in after Mother died, which is more than my father ever did for me. So your mother died when you were very young. Why didn't you stay with your father then? Oh, he was too good for us. I was a bastard, you see. He was a doctor. My mother was a maid. When he got her pregnant, he didn't want to know. Oh, that's dreadful, Bee exclaimed. Your mother must have really suffered to be used and abused in that way. Yes, I think so, Martha agreed. Could have been worse. She married my stepfather, a blacksmith, just before I was born. We lived in a village, but I hardly remember that. Did you have any brothers, sisters, siblings? The girl looked at Bee with a question in her eyes. Brothers? Sisters? 2 stepbrothers, Jack and Joseph. But where was your stepfather when your mother died? Oh, he died of consumption first. Then we were alone. We moved into the city, a tall house filled with other families. We had one room, my mother and me and my 2 brothers. Mother fell ill. I was 10. I would steal from the markets to bring back food for them. And your real father? Martha made an ugly face. He lived 2 streets away in a big house. He married a pathetic woman called Lucy 2 months after I was born. They had servants and 2 girls, always dressed in their fine garments and never hungry, while me in my rags was thieving to feed my family. Bee had forgotten the fact that she was talking to a ghost as her heart went out to this poor little girl who had suffered so much in her lifetime. Then my mother died of consumption, and she was told in such a sad, matter-of-fact way. My brothers were taken into the workhouse, and I was about to go there too, when someone came for me and brought me here to an aunt I didn't even know existed. Because the workhouses never did cease to run, you know. My father would not acknowledge me, but
Aunt Jane, Mrs. Armstrong, had agreed I could work for her as a scullery maid. It was hard work, but at least I had a roof over my head and food every day, and the air was so much cleaner than in the city. I was never allowed to tell anyone she was my aunt. And then one day my father visited and saw me here. He was so angry and forced my aunt to throw me out. I went back into the city and I found work in a flax factory. But, dear, you were only 12 years old. Most girls were between 12 and 18. We worked 10 hours a day. It was so noisy. I hated it, and I fell ill. I can't remember much after that. Only being back here again. You must have loved this place, despite all the hard work. Mm-hmm, Martha nodded. The countryside reminded me of the village we lived in when I was really small. I didn't get much time to myself while I was here. When all the duties were finished, I'd walk in the pine woods and dream of being a princess rescued by a knight.
Bee found herself smiling. The old dream of knights in shining armor rescuing damsels in distress. Or was it damsels in distress rescuing knights in shining armor? Oh, whichever. She wished it could have come true for this young girl.
And now you're all alone. Are you waiting for your father to come to you, perhaps, to acknowledge you as his daughter? I had no need to wait for him. It was I who found him. He would visit here after his wife died when he was very old. Only once did I hear him mention me, and that was to say that mistakes do happen, and I was better off dead. My aunt all but agreed. I was so angry, but then I realized that although people couldn't see me, they could sense my presence. They'd be fearful of cold breezes blowing through the room and my knocking things off of tables. They'd shake in terror when I pulled the covers off their bed. Oh, I've seen some of their friends run from the house in the dead of the night, half dressed and vowing never to return. You haunted your father and your aunt in a ghostly way? Mm-hmm. It was such fun.
She stared at Bee for a long moment.
But you aren't scared of me, are you?
Bee thought about it. No, she wasn't scared. She felt no fear of this young girl, only compassion and amusement at her antics to scare those who had been so cruel to her. I mean, why not? Bee sensed nothing evil or malicious in this presence before her. She even found herself smiling at the thought of the young ghost haunting those who had been so cruel to her, getting her own back in the way for the hurt they had caused her. Well, I'm not sure whether your antics will amuse the mystic Selina when she carries out her ghost hunt tomorrow or delight her, said Bee.
Martha laughed. I'm not sure I want to be around for the occasion. I may not be in the mood to be investigated scientifically.
So you won't be here? Bee found herself actually looking forward to tomorrow's supernatural activities.
Well, we shall have to see, won't we?
Well, you got that right, Dagmar. Not long afterwards, the lights came on as suddenly as they'd gone out. And as Powers returned to the building, the young ghost vanished as if shocked by the suddenness of the light that had instantly filled the room. Light may be for chumps, but it does help you keep from bonking your knees on the furniture thereabouts. And Bee snuggled into the comfortable bed and instantly fell into a deep sleep, dreaming of being lost in a pine forest. Branches cut her arms and face as she ran this way and that, searching for the family that had been lost to her hundreds of years before. After a hearty Scottish breakfast of eggs and bacon and sausage and beans and black pudding and tomato and tatty scones, well, that is a hearty breakfast, isn't it? Bay welcomed the invitation for guests to take a walk in the pine woods in the snow. So, dressed with no thought of fashion, but only of the need to keep warm, she joined the others as their feet crunched their way through the snow and the narrow, winding pathways between the trees. Breathing in the scent of the pine needles and relishing the icy air coming into her lungs, Bee felt this was such a contrast to her dreams of the night before. She had no need to wonder whether Martha had been a dream, too. That would have been one explanation for the paranormal encounter, but the girl had been there, in her room, conducting a conversation as if it was quite the normal thing to do. Extraordinary, Bee thought. Up until now, Bee had had no belief that the paranormal existed. Even so, she was open-minded and had always said that the day she met a ghost would be the day she'd be willing to change her perspective. And now, suddenly, during this Christmas break in Scotland, all her disbelief was being washed away. It was as if her life was beginning anew, her belief system turned upside down. For centuries, men had passed down ghost stories of ghosts and spirits returning from the dead to haunt the living. B had always felt that most strange sightings and spooky experiences could be explained by reasons that weren't paranormal. But her ghostly visitor last night was not her mind playing tricks on her. There was no other explanation for it. She had been visited by a ghost. Some people have all the luck, don't they? Paul was talking to Bee, bringing her mind back to the current surroundings. He was pointing out some markings and footprints in the snow. There were signs of rabbits and deer, along with the prints made by the black Labrador that eagerly ran back and forward and round between everyone's feet as they continued their amble through the woods. Back at the hotel, Bee joined some of the other guests in the lounge where they played the board games with a Christmas Carol DVD playing in the background. They enjoyed a cream tea and mulled wine during the afternoon, and then, after a 3-course dinner in the restaurant, those who wanted to take part in the ghost hunt were told to meet in the lounge. Now, previously, Bee had not intended to join them, but after her haunting experience of the night before, nothing would now keep her away. She actually felt excited, her body tingling in anticipation as the small group gathered in the festively decorated room. The group was not a large one. Mrs. Cullen, the hotel manager, had secured her Labrador in his cage before joining them. With her was the maid, who, now that Bee took a closer look, that maid had a similar facial features to Martha. Both girls had blonde hair, pale skin, and small lips. Both had a small birthmark on their cheek. Bee was starting to wonder whether they could be related in some way, this maid and her ghostly visitor. Paul joined the group, coming immediately to stand between Bee and the grandparents, and the only representative of the large family, the rest of them of whom were probably tucking their children safely up in their beds. The older couple was cheerfully describing their own ghostly experiences to some younger guests who were drinking in their every word. Selena made a grand entrance, sweeping into the room in her long flowing skirt and announcing very loudly that the ghost hunt was about to begin. She explained that much of the tour would be in the dark and asked the guests use torches, which were now being handed out. Everyone was welcome to use digital cameras, but sparingly, as they should remember that flashlights could disturb both the guests and the other guests' enjoyment. Flashlights could disturb both the ghost and the other guests' enjoyment of the occasion. That was my Haunted Mansion tour guide voice. When asked whether she'd be using audio or video recorders, she announced, "I'm a medium, not a scientific investigator. I don't need fancy gadgets and equipment to prove that ghosts exist. If there's anything there, I will communicate with the spirits personally. Now walk this way, if you please." If I could walk that way. Anyway. She led them out of the room and switched on her torch and asked, "Could we have the lights out, please?" Someone immediately obliged and plunged the passage and staircase into darkness. After a pregnant pause, Selena began, her voice hushed and filled with drama. "Ghosts and apparitions have been seen in the old rectory ever since it was refurbished and turned into a hotel in the 1950s. Before that, there were rumors in the village nearby about the place being haunted, but the family who lived here kept themselves to themselves. They were very religious, so I believe, and if they did experience anything ghostly, they did not tell anyone about it." She shone her light onto a painting on the wall opposite the staircase. Bee had already noticed it earlier and was knew it as of the Victorian woman dressed in a long green satin dress sitting in a chair while the man beside her, obviously a doctor, was holding her wrist to take her pulse. "Dr. and Mrs. McAllister," informed Selena. "This couple, we believe, walked these corridors in search of the doctor's sister Jane, who went walking in the woods one winter, never to return." She began to climb the stairs, the group following her. "But the doctor and his wife are not the only spirits that come to visit here. The hotel has many resident ghosts, seen by both guests and staff. There's a young girl who likes to run up and down these stairs. The Reverend Andrew MacDonald, who lived here in the early 1900s, was confined to his room at the top of the house towards the end of his life. He now walks the grounds regularly, no doubt enjoying the fresh country air. he always loved so much. After walking a few paces along an upstairs corridor, she stopped abruptly. As the group halted behind her, they all bumped into each other, apologizing, trying to make room to give each other more personal space. Selina didn't seem to notice their discomfort as she went on. The smells of roses, tobacco, smoke, and lavender, objects being thrown in light anomalies. Many different stories have passed down through the ages, added to and told and retold regarding the hauntings of this hotel. She asked the group switch off their torches as she began to walk again, the beam of her flashlight lighting the way. She could see, but the others couldn't, and halfway along the corridor someone tripped over a rug. Bee could hear a quiet curse as they fell over, and inevitably another person tripped over them, and they all began to tumble all over each other. Bee found herself lying on the floor, with Paul having fallen on top of her. She knew it was Paul because she recognized his aftershave. He mumbled an apology as he quickly lifted himself to his feet again, but Bee just joined in with the laughter that started to rumble through the corridor. "Is anyone hurt?" shouted Mrs. Cullen, concern in her voice. No one was. "Could we have some damn light in here?" demanded an elderly gentleman. "Light will scare away the spirits," Selina objected, but someone switched on a lamp that was attached to the wall. It wasn't bright, but at least they could see a little. "The noise we're making is enough to scare them away anyway," laughed Paul as he pulled the giggling Bee to her feet. "Very well. Can we continue and hope they will return?" Selina responded haughtily. She walked to the end of the corridor and stopped outside the door. "This," she informed them dramatically, "this is the room that is believed to be the most haunted. Now, before we enter, I want everyone to be silent." They all obliged. "Please do not whisper or cause any distraction while we are inside," Selina continued. "I need to concentrate on contacting the spirits." At that moment, Bee noticed some movement by the window behind the medium. She had to look twice before she could focus her eyes and realize that the pale young girl in her flowing white gown was Martha. The ghost was looking directly at her with a big smile on her face, and Bee automatically returned the smile. As Selina's voice droned on in the background, Bee looked around, wondering whether anyone else could see Martha, but even the medium couldn't seem to sense the girl. Instead, she was telling the group, "There is a dark figure of a man standing close to me." Bee heard her feet shuffle as those who were closest to her took a few steps back. He is faceless. Who are you? Tell me your name." She waited a short while and then turned to the group. "He does not want to talk just now. He just wants to let us know he is here." At that moment, Bee saw Martha walk around the medium as if searching for the figure. She looked at Bee and shrugged her shoulders with a grin as if saying, "I can't see him." Bee burst out laughing and everyone looked at her. "Sorry." "This is not supposed to be funny," the medium reprimanded her. "If you can't take it seriously, the ghosts will not come. They do not like to be laughed at." Bee had to apologize again as she tried to hold back her laughter when Martha made a face at the medium and stuck her tongue out before moving back into the shadows. They all followed Selina into the dark bedroom where a candle shone in the window. The only other light was the medium's torch. "I can sense the spirits in this room already," the medium began. Someone beside Bee shivered, and by now there was a murmurings of voices and loud whispers in response to the words. One of the guests had seen light floating across the room the night before. Another had distinctly smelled a wet dog in a room and had heard it whimpering even. "Could I ask for silence now?" came Selina's authoritative voice across the room. "If we are to make contact with the spirits, I need silence, please." "I don't like this," whispered the old woman who was standing beside Bee. "Oh, I wish I'd listened to my daughter. She's in a room with the kids watching some romantic movie on the telly. I should have stayed with her." "I told you to give you nightmares," her husband whispered back. "We said you wouldn't like it." "But I thought it would be a bit of fun, is all." Until last night, Bee had expected the ghost hunt to be an event purely for entertainment. Now she stood, with bated breath, wondering why she had eaten so much bait, and wondering what might happen next. Would the medium make contact with any other spirits in the house? Martha had said she was the only one. Would Martha show herself to Selina? Hush, directed the medium. I smell bait. No, wait. I feel something is happening. The atmosphere is changing. Yes, I see you now. Bee wanted to see it too, but the room was too dark and the people around her blocked any views she would have had of the corner where the medium stood. She could only listen to Selina's side of the conversation. The room temperature had all of a sudden dropped, and it felt as if everyone was holding their breath, listening to Selina's every word. They were told that Selina was talking to a young woman who used to work in the hotel in the early 1900s. She worked in the kitchen and she had an affair with the owner of the hotel. Then when his wife found out, she dismissed her. How do we know she's not making all this up? Whispered Paul. Well, she probably knows enough about the hotel's history to be able to make it sound plausible there, someone else replied. There's a woman here, the medium continued, totally blocking out her audience. She's upset. Do you want to share with us? She asked the air around her. Oh, what is your name? Where are you? The room was completely silent now as everyone listened intently, some craning their necks to try to see what could not be seen. Rosa, said the medium. She listened again. Rosa never lived here. She's looking for someone. One of us? Queried the old woman, dread in her voice. No. The medium was listening again. She's looking for her daughter. She used to work here. Rosa used to work here? Asked the hotel owner. Her daughter worked here, replied the medium. Maybe she was the one who had the affair, was thrown out, came a loud whisper. Mary. Is it Mary, do you say? The medium looked over to B. What is Mary to you? B went cold inside. I don't know anyone called Mary, and I couldn't possibly know anything. This is the first time I've been to Scotland, let alone this hotel. You do know her, the medium insisted. She tells me that you have spoken to her daughter. B tried to dismiss the instant thought that came to her mind, but couldn't. This was incredulous. An invisible force was describing to the medium her own experiences last night. Martha? B whispered, looking around her, but the young girl ghost was nowhere to be seen. There was another pregnant silence. A lot of promiscuous silences around here, huh? As Selina listened to her invisible visitor. Yes, that's her. The medium looked suddenly suspicious. You have spoken to Martha? Guests are not allowed to entertain in the rooms, the hotel owner cut in with an air of authority. Just as staff aren't allowed to disturb the guests. If one of my staff's been bothering you, she'll be severely reprimanded. I don't think this member of staff would be worried, smiled B. Yes, Martha talked to me. She worked here as a kitchen maid in the early 1800s, and as for entertaining in my room, I'm not sure how to ask a ghost to leave, are you? Martha's a ghost? Gasped the woman standing beside B. Your room is haunted? Again, some people have all the luck. Yes, apparently so. She thinks she's the only ghost in the hotel, B told the medium. No. Her mother is here too, Selina responded. But Martha can't see her. One ghost can't see another? This is a wind-up. The medium turned to the voice. It is possible, sir. Just as we switch on the radio and each antenna has a different frequency, spirits too operate on different frequencies. If mother and daughter are on different ones, they can pass each other without even knowing. Well, then so how do we get them together? Asked B, thinking how wonderful it would be to reunite mother and daughter. I need to speak to Martha, said the medium. Is she in the room? B shook her head. No, she was in the corridor. Show me. Selina followed her out of the door and told B to call for Martha. Bee could feel the other guest's anticipation as she did so. There was nothing in the darkness. The guests started to get restless, but Selena told them to be patient. After what seemed like an age, Bee saw a movement in the corner of the dark passageway.
Martha?
Bee whispered.
Have I annoyed someone?
The young ghost asked.
I've not done anything, I promise.
Tell her to stay where she is, the medium stated, and Bee repeated what she'd been told.
It wasn't me. I promise it wasn't me,
Martha whispered.
I didn't throw anything. I didn't move anything. I never touched anything. I don't even like Selena's ghost hunts. I always try to keep out of the way.
Bee had to reassure Martha there had been no ghostly activity in the room and no one was angry.
Oh, this is just marvelous.
Selena's voice in the darkness tingled with delight. Wait here. She disappeared back into the room, but not even long enough for the others to start asking questions. Half-whispered conversations were quickly silenced as Selena returned, talking to the ghostly visitor.
Martha's still here?
Bee nodded. Ah, then now we wait.
This is boring,
Bee heard someone whisper.
There's nothing going on. It's all been staged. I'm going down to the bar for a drink.
Yeah, I think I'll join you, said another voice. She heard footsteps walking away. Her eyes remained on Martha, feeling it was important that whatever was going on, the young girl had to stay. Can you still see her? Whispered Paul in her ear. Yes, Bee confirmed.
Shh, said the medium. Let her mother find her. I think it's working. What do you see, Bee?
Martha?
Just Martha?
Uh-huh.
I've lost her mother on my wavelength, the medium explained. She's trying to find yours. It's up to you now to keep us informed.
Bee gulped. Was this really happening? The sensible, practical, down-to-earth Bee helping two ghosts to find each other after hundreds of years searching? Her family would never believe this when, if she ever told them. She could hear the grandfather clock downstairs chiming the hours. 1, 2, 3, 4. The hour itself and nothing more. Martha was looking unsettled. Did she have to leave at midnight like Cinderella? 5, 6, 7. Something else was happening. Another shape was appearing by the young girl. Was it a bedpost? No, not a bedpost. 8, 9, 10.
What can you see? The medium asked urgently. Can you see them both?
11, 12. The clock struck 12. The figure of a young woman materialized before Bee's eyes. She seemed to glow, and the light not only shone around her, but reached out to the ghost of the young girl, too. Bee could feel her body tingling in astonished reaction.
I see them, Bee whispered.
She could feel the other's curiosity and intrigue as she watched mother and daughter move into each other's arms. And then for just a few seconds, the mother looked her way and whispered,
Thank you,
before they both disappeared.
They've gone,
Bee said, feeling a little deflated and emotionally exhausted.
We can have the lights on now,
exclaimed the medium, as the corridor was suddenly bathed in light.
Our deed this evening is done. We reunited them, then?
Asked Bee, still finding it hard to take in what had happened.
We certainly did. In all my years as a medium, this has got to have been the most memorable evening yet. Hey, everybody, it's December 25th. Happy Christmas!
All joined in as Bee had the most wonderful thought. She had just helped to give the best Christmas gift ever. She had helped reunite the ghosts of a mother and a daughter who had been wandering this place, searching for each other for hundreds of years. Wow, she exclaimed with a heavy sigh. Selena smiled, knowing exactly how she felt. Wow, she agreed. Bee missed breakfast the next morning, the first time ever she had slept in on Christmas Day. And then again, there had been plenty of firsts this holiday: her first trip to Scotland, her first Christmas away from the family, her first ghost encounter, her first glimpse of a spiritual side to herself that she hadn't known she'd possessed. It was all rather a lot to take in, really. Selena had sat with her in the lounge until the wee small hours, as the medium had described it, discussing Bee's strange experiences. The medium had explained how ghosts resided in different regions. The level they occupied depended on their energy, spiritual power, and capabilities. Hence the reason why Martha and her mother had never, in all the years they'd been wandering around this same building, encountered each other. It also explained why Selina was unable to see Martha and how Bee couldn't sense the mother. They were two turned into different frequencies, apparently. On realizing the problem, the older ghost was able to tune into the younger one's channel, but she needed to know exactly where Martha was in order to be able to find her. Hence, when she did, Bee could then see them both, but Selina was unable to tune into either one. Bee had psychic abilities and could be a good medium, or maybe, large or extra large. And Selina had told her this. Bee was having enough difficulty getting her head around all the paranormal activity she just witnessed without thinking about the future, though. The hotel was quiet when Bee went downstairs on Christmas morning. Most guests were at the morning service in the village church. Bee wondered how the vicar would react if he heard about the Christmas Eve ghost hunt. Some had chosen to walk off their hearty breakfast and to work up a good appetite for Christmas dinner. Bee was content to sit around reading by the blazing fire in the lounge in an attempt to focus her mind back onto the more human aspects of life, and considered that she really should upgrade her Kindle to one with a backlight, maybe a Paperwhite Generation 7. The four-course Christmas dinner was as delicious as the brochure had promised it would be. After a start of sweet melon, Bee chose traditional roasted stuffed turkey and ham, followed by Christmas pudding with brandy and vanilla sauce. Conversation was casual and light-hearted during the meal, and afterwards, while they drank coffee and enjoyed the after-dinner mints, it was as if everyone had decided not to touch on the spooky experiences of the night before. Christmas Day in the hotel that year was very much a one to celebrate the pleasures of life and the joy of sharing with the living. Bee realized, however, that she felt a new sense of respect for the medium who left soon after the meal. She knew their promise to keep in touch with each other would be kept. She packed her bags on Boxing Day, feeling strangely restless and empty. She was leaving early in the morning, ready for the long train journey home. As she got into the taxi outside the hotel door, she heard a voice call from the garden. When she looked out towards the fields, with the woods beyond, two female figures stood in the snow. They waved as they began walking away, and Bee felt a sudden sense of peace within her heart. She had already said goodbye to the staff and the other guests. Somehow, it would not have felt right if she had left without having had the chance to say and wave goodbye to Martha.